Well, one day there was a new pastor in town. He was walking down the road, and he saw a young farmer struggling with a load of hay. Pitchfork, hay, pitchfork, hay. The hay had fallen off the truck. And so, of course, the boy was hot and sweaty, and he was very upset. Now, the pastor, wanting to be a good neighbor, a good Samaritan, and practice what he preached from the pulpit, stopped and he urged the young man to, hey, take a break, rest for a moment. And after that, I'll give you a helping hand. No thanks, said the young man. My father wouldn't like it. Don't be silly, the pastor said. Everyone needs a break now and then. Come on, put that pitchfork down. Have a drink of water here. Take a rest. The young man refused, saying his father would be really upset. Losing patience, the pastor said to the young lad, your father must be a real slave driver. Tell me where I can find him and I'll give him a piece of my mind. Well, replied the young man, he's under that load of hay. Well, no good deed goes unpunished, right? Well, here we are 20 centuries later from our reading, and just who is our neighbor and how can we be a good Samaritan? If we unpack this parable a lot, it's dealing more with not so much as your neighbor as trying to turn the table somewhat on this young lawyer, as I said, because he was trying to justify himself. You remember I taught justification 3 weeks ago, and what justification meant. Well, the lawyer, of course, thought he was doing everything good, patting him on the shoulder, okay, and of course, who was my neighbor? Of course, that was the setup for Jesus to take and say, well, while we're talking about neighbors, and of course, he immediately goes to this idea of a Samaritan, which obviously, whoa, ain't got nothing to do with the Samaritans, okay? So, of course, he asks the right question. What does Jesus ask you? The greatest commandment, you love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Simply put, if you think about it. But the lawyer wasn't satisfied, so Jesus had to take and open up in this beautiful parable about the Good Samaritan. But I ask that question myself sometimes. I wonder, who are my neighbors? Who are our neighbors? And I think about it. With all the war and unrest going on around the world, and the crime industries and the bad news we hear, how can we actually be good Samaritans in today's world? I mean, I think many of us are frightened to go out alone at night. We don't leave our doors unlocked anymore, which is an interesting story. We drive with our cars locked, and of course nowadays you turn the car on and you get up to about 15 miles an hour and they automatically lock for you. Why? Because you don't want your car carjacked. And we walk in twos, we build up our defenses. Amazing, I had a sociology professor one time as an undergraduate in college, and she said that the crime rate really jumped in the 1960s. And I assumed in my mind, since I was a child or a product of the 1960s, I knew why all that crime. I mean, let's face it, we had the Vietnam War, and there was protests against that, and there was the Civil Rights Movement, and there was the Kennedy assassination, the Kennedy's assassination, the King assassination, and of course there were riots and everything. So yeah, pretty much a time of rising crime. But she said no. She said that her research had proven that beginning in the 1950s and into the 1960s, amazingly, people began to air condition their houses. So I thought, now where's she going with this? And she said what people would do, they would close their windows. Most people in the olden days, okay, would leave their windows up. They might have a fan blowing or something, okay? But now, windows closed, air conditioning. Of course, she's talking about them portable units that, used to hang out our windows and everything. But of course, you hear the air conditioning roaring along and the windows are closed, and of course, your front door is unlocked because you're not out on your front porch or your front steps, or you're not on your deck or whatever area you are. You don't know what's going on around you. And so as a result of that, a person across the street could be being murdered in gunshots, and you wouldn't hear it because the air conditioning is roaring. Your windows are closed, your door's closed, you don't know nothing. She says, so a great deal of crime could be attributed to the fact that we cocooned ourselves into our homes during that period of time, and we didn't know what's going on. As a matter of fact, she says, as time went on, we even did not know who our neighbors were. We didn't hang outside to stay cool in the evening. We didn't see people walking by, passing by. We don't even know, she said, who our neighbors are on either side of us. And in many cases, it's gotten to the point we don't want to know who our neighbors are. Well, anyway, moving on to that fact, of course, with this in mind, just who are our neighbors? And there's ways to be a good Samaritan. There are ways to be a good Samaritan. I think in many ways, many opportunities we have to be good Samaritans to people who we don't really know that well, but still we can practice the love that Jesus is talking about. As some of you know, I volunteer on Wednesday mornings to feed the homeless at Loaves and Fishes Ministry over on Lee Street in Pensacola. And of course, people come up there, 6 o'clock in the morning, and they come for coffee and they come for breakfast, and I have an opportunity to give them a short gospel message and pray with them, of course, an invocation before we eat. And it's interesting, of course, that I see more and more children showing up. I'm kind of amazed at that. What are these kids doing here? But we don't turn anybody away. Anybody comes to that, ministry, they're allowed to be fed. So we're feeding. So I was talking with Mrs. Hill, the director, a few weeks ago, and I said, Mrs. Hill, I'm seeing more and more kids coming, with their parents and things to eat here in the morning. And she goes, yeah, Greg. She says, that's pretty common. And I said, well, I haven't seen that before. She goes, well, yeah. She says, you probably just didn't notice it that much. She says, but the fact of the matter is that most of these families, their food stamps run out before the middle of the month. And I says, especially, she says, in Escambia County and in Santa Rosa County, 1 out of 3 children are hungry during the summer. I said, what do you mean hungry? I mean, 1 out of 3? She goes, oh yeah. She says, when the schools are out, kids are not getting a free or reduced breakfast or lunch, federally funded program. And of course, the kids don't eat. And so what do? They show up to eat at a feeding ministry. So you look at something like we can do personally, which we do with manna, for instance. Think about the food, that food bank, and how many people it serves with no cost, no charge whatsoever, freely. And their shelves get constantly depleted, get low. So one way to be a good Samaritan simply is volunteer your time with a ministry like manna, as some of you do. Or the next time this week when you're rolling down the supermarket aisle at Winn-Dixie or Publix, pull some things off the shelves that the list out there tells us and bring them in so we can take and continue to be a good Samaritan and help people we don't even know in our own community who are food deprived. Seriously, that kind of shook me, 1 out of 3 children. Volunteering your time. Visiting an elderly person, I think, is another way to be a good neighbor. I love the elderly. I'm becoming the elderly. faster than I thought. But when I was a child, I loved being around older people because they all had stories to tell. I mean, fascinating stories. I mean, they talked about the Great Depression. They talked about World War II and what it was like to be a kid back in the 30s. And I was just amazed. And I remember my grandmother telling me about how she thought it was so great when she got electricity in her house because her and her sisters didn't have to clean kerosene globes, lanterns that they lit their house with the soot each day, while the boys, her brothers, had to take and fill a coal scuttle to keep the house warm. A coal scuttle. I'm like, I love that. That's why I'm enjoying history so much, is because I enjoyed the stories that people told. Because everybody's got a story to tell. And I love it. But I mean, get around somebody who's older than you and listen to their stories. It's fascinating. I mean, I can sit for hours and just listen to, I know it's probably strange, but listen to the stories that people tell. And I was continually amazed, like, wow, really? I mean, it just boggles your mind nowadays. I was talking with a friend the other day, and it's like, what would we do without computers? But I think most of us in this room here were probably born in BC. We were all born before computers. But imagine a world without them. How did they survive? And then they tell me that they went to the moon. They went to the moon in 1969. That's something some people don't remember. We did go there 6 times, by the way, in the 69 through 1972. We did go to the moon. But how did they do that? If you take your cell phone, that's about as much computing memory power that was used to power the Apollo spacecraft to the moon and back. Think of that. Some people say it's even like the one in your electric wristwatch, for instance, that much computing power. Amazing if you think about it. But this is an elderly person. Talk to them. I mean, they got so many stories to tell, and then one of these days they're not going to be here to tell those stories. So we can pass them on. And it doesn't help. I mean, you can, write a card to somebody, give somebody a call. But I really like paying things forward. I think that's the greatest way, or the funnest way, to be a good Samaritan. You ever seen somebody pay it forward? So it's probably about 20 or 30 years old now. It's a story about a young boy who wants to make the world a better place, and so he does good deeds for people who don't even know that they're doing it, okay, by paying it forward instead of paying it back. He thought that would make the world a better place. In my life, have you ever, think about this, have you ever pulled up to a Starbucks window and had the server tell you, the young lady right there at the window tell you, that the person just pulling out paid for your coffee? I think that's amazing. I have that wonderful feeling of community, and I have a much better day because somebody who I don't even know paid for my coffee. And so I said the same thing to Judy. I said, we're going to pay for the people behind us. She says, okay. She goes, how much do you think it's going to be? And I said, I don't know. I said, I hope it's not a $40 coffee bill. I know that's selfish, but I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I was taking a gamble. But sure enough, I paid for the person behind me. I thought it was funny. Of course, they're thanking me and everything, and I thought it was fun. Pay it forward. I may have told you this story before, but we used to have, years ago, because I lived in Maryland, and we had a tunnel called the Fort McHenry Tunnel. You may have been under it through it or something. It's actually Interstate 95, north and southbound. But instead of going through the city of Baltimore or around the city of Baltimore, you go under the harbor and you come up where Fort McHenry is, the birthplace of our Star-Spangled Banner. Hence the name Fort McHenry Tunnel. Well, when I first opened up back in 1982, the toll was $1. And so sometimes I would go through the toll booth and I would say, peel off $2 and tell the toll collector, pay for the car behind me. And I loved the reaction of people. They would go through that toll booth and they would speed up to me, and they would be waving their hand and they would be, putting their thumbs up and everything. Like it really made somebody's day. What's $1? But then the state of Maryland ruined it. They came up with what's called Easy Pass, just like the Sun Pass. So you can't pay for the car behind you. But it was always fun doing that, paying for the person behind me. We can do it in many ways. I mean, I can give you more examples. I just think of one more is interesting. There was a young man in my previous church who had lost his job during the last bad recession. That was, 2007, 2008, I think it was. The housing crisis and the banking problems and everything. He lost his job, and eventually his unemployment ran out, and his severance pay was gone, and I was calling Harry. Harry was really down to the point where he told me one Sunday, he goes, Pastor, I never thought I would believe it, but I'm going to apply for food assistance, for food stamps. I said, really, Harry, is it that bad? He goes, yes. He says, I haven't found a job. I'm busting that exhausting my unemployment benefits. I don't know what I'm going to do. So, of course, I'm putting two and two together, and I thought, well, we have a benevolence fund at the church. Maybe I'll just simply, give Harry some money and, tide him over a little bit. I think I had a $1,000 benevolence fund that Sessions said I could use for whatever purposes. When someone came to the church and were in desperate need for something, but we usually wanted to help church members first. But then I thought about that. No, I'm going to be a good Samaritan. And so what I did, I would take and send Harry $50 each week in an unmarked envelope. The only return address I put on it was Good Samaritan. And I would type it, print it through my computer, and I would type it out for Harry, and I'd mail it to him. And it drove Harry crazy. He was trying to figure out who is giving me $50 every week, And he would ask people in the church. Of course, people were clueless. I don't know. So, of course, he comes to me and he goes, Pastor, somebody in this church is really great. You know who they are? I'm getting $50 bill every week in the mail from them, or from that person. And, of course, I couldn't lie. But I said, well, Harry, I know who's doing it. But I have to be honest with you. Part of my ordination vows is that I must maintain a certain amount of discretion of what goes on in the church. And so personally, really, what happens in the pastor's study has to stay in the pastor's study. I really can't tell you who is sending you that money, but it's a blessing, isn't it? Harry goes, that certainly is, Pastor. You don't know how much of a blessing. I only did it for about 6 weeks or something, maybe a month and a half. And Harry ended up getting a job. But I loved it. I loved it with him getting that, and he never knew to this very day. I hope he doesn't. I made up the name anyway. But if he sees him on YouTube, he'll know that how he was giving him $50. But it drove me crazy, and I thought, boy, I brought joy. And I said, well, it's $50 to me. $50 is when Judy and I go out to a restaurant somewhere and drop $50 without even blinking a week. That's no big deal. So it was fun. It was fun to do that. And Harry never knew it. I just chuckle about that. But I love that bumper sticker that reads, practice random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. Random acts of kindness, random. Being a good Samaritan, what does it mean? You don't even know whose lives you can impact. I'll close with a story that I find so interesting. Let me just take a moment and read this to you. There's two men who were in a hospital room together. One was very sick and bound on his bed. He had had back surgery and was not able to take and raise himself up in bed. The other man was sick, but due to the nature of his illness, he was able to sit up in his chair each day for about an hour. And he would sit up and look out the window, and he would entertain his bedmate there, his friend, with what he could see. Looking out the window, he would regale the man with all the things that were going on. He told tales about the park across the street and the beautiful green trees and the swings where the kids were playing. He would tell about the young woman walking in the sunshine in their summer dresses blowing in the warm breeze, and the stolen kisses of romance where couples would be walking around holding hand in hand. He would talk about people walking their dogs and boys climbing trees and people playing with frisbees and all that. And he took such joy in sharing this picture to the man. And it really made the man feel a lot better. It made him feel like, eventually I'm going to get up out of this bed, when I recuperate from this spine surgery. And, but one day he began to feel resentful that he could not see all this for himself out that window. He didn't want to witness it secondhand any longer. He wanted to have the window to himself so he could see these things. So he began wishing for this. Well, one dark night, the man on his back could hear his roommate gasping for breath and struggling for the emergency button to summon help. He just lay there and could think of nothing. The next morning it was discovered that the man had died in his sleep. When the man on his back felt a respectable period of time had passed, he asked the nurse if he could be placed by the window also, where the man previously was. The nurse moved him there, and sure enough, he struggled and laboriously rose himself up in his bed and looked out the window, only to see a brick wall. A brick wall. The man who would regale him with all these things was only doing it to make him feel better as a good Samaritan. What is the moral of the story? Simple kindness. Simple kindness, helping, costs us nothing. We don't need credit for it. So who are our neighbors? Our neighbors are everyone. Our neighbors are everyone who is a part of the human race. Our neighbors are the people who are completely around us in this community. Say hello to anyone. A genuine smile. It could be the only smile you get all day. And of course, love your neighbors yourself. We attract people to this church because they'll know we are Christians by our love. If we can love one another inside this church, then we can love people, no matter who they are, outside this church. And when we do that, when we discover that everyone is our neighbor, that we are all members of the human race, we will change the dynamics of this church and maybe the dynamics of our worship also. Our neighbors are out there and they come from many walks of life. And so the lesson this morning is it's too often easy to look at people as us versus them. Or to say, well, they're a little bit different than we are. But as Christians, we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. So what does it mean to you? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for each one of us? In every situation in our life, we have opportunity to be a good Samaritan. So I ask you in the future to think about using your time, your talents, whatever gifts God has given you, to take and give them back to God, not out of duty, or some type of works to get on, as I said, God's good side, but simply for the love of God. Not out of service at all. For love of neighbor in this crowd doesn't mean you have to go to faraway places to find people in need. They're all around us in our own community here. It could be the person sitting next to you in the pew right here. They may have a need, and they're your neighbor also. It could be a person that's visiting this church. It could be somebody who senses a need. You feel a need here, which I'm very humbly going to take today, and my wife's going to take halfway around the world. That's really Christian love. And that's emblematic of this congregation. So what are you doing about it? I think we've already got a pretty good start on what we're doing. And Jesus' last words to that lawyer was, go and do likewise. So my friends, go. Serve others in love. Go and do likewise. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.